Hello. I'm going to review two books in this post, both about the singer and writer Bob Dylan, and both focusing mainly on the 1960s. This year, 2021, was the year of Dylan's 80th birthday, and there have been lots and lots of publications as a result, inevitably. But it's also only 2 or 3 years on from Dylan being awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. The first is Wicked Messenger, Bob Dylan and the 1960s, by Mark McQuasey. I hope that's pronounced correctly. McQuasey was an American who lived for a large part of his adult life in London, I believe. He was a political and cultural commentator and a very intelligent writer. This book, Wicked Messenger, mainly looks at Dylan within the political culture, or the political context rather, of the 1960s. It does go later, but the meat of the book is in that decade. And it opens by reminding us that Bob Dylan, at 22 years old, shared a platform with Martin Luther King in the March on Washington in 1963. I mean, he was right up there and considered an incredibly important force. His song Blowing in the Wind just revolutionised popular music in the sense that there'd been no song like that had captured so many imaginations and so many sales. And Dylan was very quickly branded a protest singer, and his songs were commandeered by various left-wing or progressive causes, the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War protests being the big ones. Dylan wrote some marvellous songs in that period. I mean, he was very young when he wrote A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and yet, 60 years on, that song still sounds magnificent. Blowing in the Wind, of course, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, beautiful, marvellous song, still marvellous today. He wrote some great songs. And then he seemed to renounce it all. He went electric in 1965 at the Newport Folk Festival, outraging many, and then his new songs seemed to have no explicit political content at all. McQuasey is very, very good on this period and these changes. So let me just read from it. He says, of course, many on the left saw Dylan's turn from politics as little more than opportunism. They were reeling from an abrupt and painful repudiation. After all, Dylan hadn't put that much time or energy into trying to change things before he decided it wasn't worth the effort. So was it just for a handful of silver he left us, just for a ribbon to stick on his coat, as Browning asked of Wordsworth? Was it, as suspected by some on the left, his manager's appetite for the big time, or Dylan's narcissistic vanity? Clearly, the ambitious artist that was stirring inside Dylan feared being stereotyped as a protest singer and a servant of good causes. And he would have been aware, if only through Woody Guthrie's experiences, of the left's bad habit of grabbing onto creative artists and trying to program their output. The moralism of the American left in these years, embodied in both the civil rights and the peace movements, was indeed wearing. The stern challenge to bear witness against injustice, whose echoes fill Blowing in the Wind, seemed to leave little room for private indulgence. Dylan's response should be seen as part of a political battle to clear a space for the personal, a battle fought as much within as against the left. So it's thought-provoking stuff, McQuasey writes, I think, about this period. Dylan's new songs were also denser in terms of their lyrical content and concerned about society and relationships and love still, but in a much more layered, complex fashion. This is what McQuasey says again. He says, The songs are full of Dylan's discontent with elements of conventional male-female relationships, and with his and others' failed attempts to construct an alternative. The political parallels are clear. In personal relationships, it was also year zero. Only no one came to this launching pad without millennia of acquired expectations. You can feel Dylan scratching at the walls of his misogyny, trying to break or sneak or fake his way out, then reeling back exhausted, unable to fathom or name his prison. There's a poignancy in that. So it's a few years before feminism coined the phrase that the personal is political, and Dylan was struggling to understand that link himself. The second book, which I also strongly recommend, which I read this year, is John Baldy's The Chameleon Poet, Bob Dylan in Search of Self. Again, it focuses predominantly on the 1960s, although not completely. And this one's more concerned with Dylan's search for individuality and for authenticity. Authenticity in terms of how somebody lives with themselves, and also authenticity in relationships. John Baldy, who was tragically killed in 1996, started the first journal to take Dylan seriously. Baldy was an English teacher and came at Dylan mainly from a kind of literary point of view. And this book has only just surfaced in 2021, although it was being written way back, we think, in the 1960s onwards. In this, I wrote down here that it's an extremely well-written analysis of Dylan's development through the 1960s, although it goes into the late 70s. I found myself contrasting and comparing it to Marquez's Wicked Messenger, which concentrates on Dylan and the politics of the 1960s. Baldy's book concentrates more on the individual's struggle for authenticity during these tumultuous times. He draws heavily on Shakespeare, especially Hamlet and King Lear, but also on Hermann Hesse and Carl Jung. Again, it's incredibly well written. Again, it captures the huge significance of Dylan as an artist. Dylan is most associated with the 1960s, and these two books and many others demonstrate why that is. But he's not just an artist of the 1960s. And these two books show that he is still involved in the basic struggle of the individual. I'm going to go back to Marquez's book and read the last paragraph, because I think in many ways he sums this up very, very neatly. Dylan's 60s music has been packaged and repackaged, along with its era, but it eludes the death grip of academia and the banality of corporate media. It still exudes the spirit and the pain of human liberation. It still asks demanding questions of anyone who wants to change society, or just survive within it as a free human being. There must be some way out of here. Dylan may never have found it, but that doesn't mean he can't help the rest of us on our journey.